With that though, let's plan on getting started, and Phoebe will be able to join us as she arrives. Really excited to continue our career conversations. We've been sharing this with both students and then also having this as a virtual recording so we can be following up and sharing this conversation with our students. With that, excited to have 3 alum of our program today that are involved in the human services nonprofit sector. If we could just start, do you mind each giving a quick introduction, name, what school you went to, major, and then also where you're working today and job title. And we tend to do this just popcorn style. I can certainly call on people, but I know we're also out of school and trying to not have the format where I have to call on people.
Okay, I'll go first if that's all right.
That'd be great.
My name is Yasmin Abdi, and I went to Carleton College for my undergrad, BA in psychology, and I went to University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities for my master's in speech, language, and hearing sciences.
Phoebe, do you want to go next, or do you want me to go? Okay, since I'm talking, so my name is TA, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently a program associate at Borealis Philanthropy under their Racial Equity Initiatives Fund. It's a mouthful. And I also went to Carleton, so that's fun. So I got my degree in sociology and anthropology and a minor in women and gender studies.
My name is Phoebe Chastain. I work at WellShare International. We're a nonprofit that does community health education across the Twin Cities. I am also a Carleton grad, and I was an American Studies major with a Women and Gender Studies concentration.
I love it. All different variety of majors starting out, and I love that we've all kind of ended up in very different spaces within these fields. So do we want to start and just share, is this the field that you were trying to get to right out of school, or how did you kind of discover the space that you're in now?
Okay, I wasn't planning on this. I think I've always had a fascination with language, how we learn, and cognitive development over the lifespan. So sometime around high school, 10th grade maybe, I decided psychology was the way to go. And my family said, really? We wanted you to be a doctor. So I decided on a compromise. And went for concentration in pre-medical studies while I was at Carleton College. Found out after I graduated that, and I'm trying to write, one of those letters that tries to convince people you want to do this. It's like, I'm not convincing. I don't really want to do this. And I shifted towards developmental psychology interests, and from there got exposed to speech therapists providing services as well as other providers. But that's the thing that really was like, oh yeah, this is what I really am into. And so I went to graduate school for speech therapy to become a speech therapist, and went into schools. There are different options for what you can do as a speech therapist, and I wanted to work in the school system, and that's how I'm here.
Yeah, and I think I had like a similar non-linear path as well, but there's always been kind of this consistent kind of interest that I've had growing up. I am queer, I'm a first-gen immigrant, I'm a Southeast Asian, so I've never felt like my experiences fit neatly in anywhere, not in school or family or community. But so when I got to college, really, being able to be exposed to like the social sciences and humanities where, knowledge wasn't really straightforward or in the binary, like math or sciences, it's like other this or that. It was so much in the gray area. So for me, I was always very drawn to like those questions about our human existence and our culture and like how we all relate to each other. So, Carleton's a liberal arts school. So, you got to take classes in anything to explore that question. So I actually remember the Wallin ceremony and declaring in front of everyone that I would be a sociology anthropology major and a women gender studies major. So, I manifested that. But I think after graduating, it hasn't been linear at all. But I do think I've always had this fundamental belief in that I really wanted to contribute to a world where everyone had what they needed to live whole, healthy and joyful lives. And so, at first that was a public health question. So I thought I'd have a career in public health, and that changed. Then I got kind of catapulted into direct service and higher education, where I met Liz and Muna. So I think for me that question's just constantly evolved, and it's there's complexities to a career, and what you want changes. So I think my advice for students is your goals will change, you'll have tensions in whatever job or career you have, and I think those are all things to learn from, and it's okay to change your mind and develop that. So for me, I'm in philanthropy now, but who knows, maybe I'll try to ask that question in a different way, and that question will evolve, and I hope it does.
Yeah, I think a lot of what both of you said resonates with me too. I think when I was in high school, I thought about the classes that I found the most interesting were the ones that I found the most challenging. So I was really excited by my science classes, my math classes. But then when I got to college, I realized that I found those to be really hard and not really where my passion was. I was more interested in exploring complicated ideas about the way that our society is constructed, and looking at the history of our country, of the world, of other places. And there are just so many more opportunities to have more specific, I guess, questions when you're going through those classes, especially in the history department in high school. You take a one-year class on American history, but there's a lot that you don't discover. And then in college, I could take one class that literally covered the Puritan era, which is just 100 years in American history. And even that felt too broad. So it just felt a lot richer. And when I started at Carleton, I think I wanted to do neuroscience and pre-med, and I ended up doing American Studies because I felt that there was a lot more flexibility, and I could be more independent with kind of following my interests and my passions. So I declared an American Studies major, not really sure where it would lead me, but I knew that I wanted to talk about big ideas and try and do that work instead of just following a more linear path into the medical field or something along those lines. So after college, I've done a couple of different things, and I think with each of them, it's been really important to me to be surrounded by people who like talking about the impact of our work, not just doing what we're told to do or following the check marks to fulfill grant requirements, but really talking through what is the work that we're actually doing, and what is the impact that we can have on the community that we're working with or providing services to, and what is the bigger system in which we're operating.
Yeah, each of the three of you are really hitting on the big conversations surrounding us today. And first of all, I just want to thank you for your community leadership, because our communities need it. And I think we talked a little bit, each of the three of you talked about kind of the goals or your interests, adapting over time. And just would be curious, you shared about the specific experiences that you had. When you were in college and early in your careers, what was that process like of kind of acknowledging, those changing goals versus, other pressures of, what you had originally set out on?
I think for me, the summer between my freshman and sophomore year of college was when I really, I took a break from really committing to the pre-med track and thinking about what I wanted out of my time in school and what were the classes that I enjoyed the most and the types of assignments that I wanted to do. And I really enjoyed writing papers and was kind of done doing the normal like math test or science tests, and talked with a lot of people around me to get their advice just about, I don't know, I grew up where my parents each kind of did the same thing my whole life. So I had never considered that I could have a different job every 3, 4, 8 years, however long. Like I didn't have to do the same thing once I graduated college, I would be in the same job the rest of my life. And I had a few conversations with people who really helped me understand that. And that just lifted a lot of weight off of my shoulders and helped me realize that I didn't need to treat my college education as the be all end all. It was just a period of time. And if I needed to or wanted to like refocus or specialize in something else down the road, that I would have the time and the opportunity to kind of pursue that later on. I think a lot of times with school especially, there is this pressure to like know exactly what you want to do and for it to pay off directly right after. And I think it was really liberating for me to realize that's not even what I wanted out of my life. I wanted to be able to have flexibility to try different things. But it was tough. It was really hard. There was a lot of like journaling, a lot of talking with people on the phone from near and far, and being patient with myself. I didn't rush into not doing pre-med. I kind of gave myself my fall semester to try something different, just to not take science classes and try more. I think I took a sociology class and a language class and history or something, and that felt really good. So it was sort of like over time collecting different information about my decision process.
I think my process was so much more hazy. That was really awesome to hear, Phoebe. That sounds like a lot of introspection and just support and learning yourself. I spend a lot of time in my head, less so now as I'm older and getting to know, knowing myself more and better. But back then, I loved the pre-med classes, so it wasn't so easy to understand or clearly like tease out like what it is that's not going to work for me and etc. I'm a firstborn and I'm the firstborn child in a family of 8 children, immigrant, and there are all these expectations to do a certain thing, and I internalized it myself, and so I wanted to excel and I wanted to do well. I didn't have family or family friends who could give me guidance or counsel or things like that. So I kind of had to figure it out. I worked during my undergrad years to be able to afford college as well as, scholarships. Basically, I'm a scholarship kid. I was able to afford Carleton through scholarships, Wallin being one of them. So it was a great time. I loved my science classes. I'm that person who, I don't know, I feel like if I was going to go into anything, if I would have gone into anything else, it would have been biological chemistry. That's kind of the way my mind works. I explored music courses. Fantastic. I had the best time. It just came easily, joyfully. I loved literature, English literature. And so when I could like squeeze another class in and be like, please, I know I'm overloaded, but this would be the fun thing I do this term. Let me into your class. That kind of a situation, to allow myself to to allow myself to manage myself and be healthy while also involved in all these really competitive courses and things like that. And, you know, I really just had a reckoning with myself, like my last, you know, it's a trimester system. So my last trimester, and, you know, right, like that half a year after I graduated, you know, I really had a reckoning with myself about what I was doing. And, you know, I, you know, had to find the balance between family expectations, you know, and obligations that I felt, duty that I felt, as well as duty to myself, you know, and my own future well-being and happiness and all that. It wasn't easy. It was rough. It's kind of rough. Again, not very in tune with my feelings, you know, not the deep feelings of why I do what I do, but more like, you know, in my thinking space most often. So actually I took yoga classes that really helped me get in touch with myself. And my family was, you know, kind enough to allow me that 6 months, or about 6 months of, you know, going through that process with myself to figure out what I'm going to do next. And you know, my family was poor, so it was really, really generous of my family to allow that space and time for that. So I explored the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits job board, you know, to help myself to get some of those hands-on experiences with, you know, anything to do with developmental psychology. That's what I was looking for. I shadowed psychiatrists. I shadowed psychologists to also be like, am I really gonna do this? You know, while I was trying to do that whole application process for medical school, that didn't go. So it was a tumultuous period. It was a tumultuous 6 months, 7 months almost, you know, kind of period for me of just working through what am I going to do with myself in this education that I have? And a liberal arts education, the pluses and the minuses, a lot of people will say is you feel like you can do a lot of different things. But if you're me, it's like, narrow it down. What are you gonna do? And having to make that shift, that change from what I thought I was gonna do to finding something new. I volunteered at the Sexual Violence Center in North Minneapolis to also allow myself to get that mental health perspective through adults and trauma and all of that. And, you know, I found Fraser. I don't know how many people are familiar with Fraser, but they do really fantastic work with children who've been diagnosed with autism and their families, caregivers, communities. And that was the best find ever, because it put me in a place where I could explore all the different things that I was passionate about, that I was curious about, and feel as though I was also contributing and, you know, not just making a paycheck, but doing meaningful work, you know? And it turns out that's exactly where I belonged. That was fantastic. I stayed there for quite some time trying to figure out what was challenging for me, because I am driven by, you know, challenge. I need to be mentally challenged or I'm just not really in it. So I was emotionally involved, mentally challenged, and growing. There was room for creativity and growth. So that I felt like that was a fantastic place for me to be. And then I, through that, connected with occupational therapists and speech therapists and physical therapists and psychologists again in my life, you know. So it was another period of what do I want to do? And then I got into that place where, you know, you've been doing something for a while and you're like, I need something different. I need something else. And then it's like reevaluating, okay, what is it that I'm passionate about? What is it that I'm really into? What is it that really gets me excited? You know, like I wake up in the morning, I go to work and I do all these different things. And what about the things I do am I really passionate about? And it was always about communication and connection. And so it's like, thank you, speech therapists. I think I'm going to try this. I was also finding myself working with a lot of families of color, people of color. And the funny thing that happens is, people approach you and they say, so what do I do, after talking to the speech therapist? And I go, okay, so what we need now is to break it down. That's what you're really asking me. Say it again. Say it in a way that I'll really be able to hold on to it. And also, I trust you because you look like me. That happens, that comes up. So I go, all right, well, the speech therapist is a speech therapist. They know what they're doing, So it was really good to have those relationships with those therapists and then have them, kind of support my role as, I went through different roles, but at the time it was mental health practitioner. And so these families trusted me with their children for like half the day, like 4 hours a day treatment session. And they understood that that was part of what was going on. And they were able to collaborate with me, just help me to understand why they were saying this to the family. And then when I could build my understanding through that dialogue with them, I could reframe what it was that had been discussed so that the families could take it with them, hold on to it longer, maybe. And like all kinds of therapy, I don't know how many people are, familiar with therapy. Yeah, but sometimes you got to hear the same thing 10 different ways, 100 different ways before it finally like clicks. So that's kind of how I got into that. And graduate school was, again, very challenging. I tried a lot of different things, children, adults. Turns out children is where where I have the most experience and where I have the most drive. So that's how I ended up in the school system. And also I'm really passionate about working with people who are marginalized, people who don't necessarily have access to resources. And I thought I could go to a clinic setting, I'd get paid more. But again, finding that balance between, I need to be able to support my living and my life. And I need to be challenged up here too, and then where's that driving passion where I get up in the morning and when things are hard, I still want to do this. So that's how I ended up where I am. It's not easy. It's kind of a curly path, sometimes loops and then you go back. It's all good.
Yasmin, I resonate so much with so much of what you just shared, like the piece about, there's duty to your family and these expectations, but there's also that duty to yourself. Like that was like 100% me as well. You tell your parents you're like going to be a social science major and they're like, what? And then you're like, oh, I want to like work in, the social welfare space. And they're like, huh? You're going to do what for no money? So I think there's this, they don't know what they don't know. And, there's things that we don't know about. And so that bridge building and trying to, what you want to do. And sometimes I think for me, it was like, I didn't have the answers. I knew what I didn't want. So when I graduated, I was like so over like the intellectual debates and theoretical discussions. I really was just done. School was like a no-no. So it's cool to hear, Yasmin, like your path towards like working throughout college and then connecting to like a master's degree, because I think between us three, you're the only one that has another degree. But yeah, so for me, I was like, I know what I don't want. I don't want to go to school. I don't want to study. I want to like do something. And so I grew up in South Minneapolis. And I grew up in the Powderhorn / Kingfield neighborhood, actually 2 blocks away from where George Floyd was murdered. And so for me, when I left school, I said to myself, like, I definitely want to help the community. I want my community to be helped, right? Because I grew up like the people around in my community and my family did very much with very little, so I knew that there was just more out there, right, for us, and thinking about what we could accomplish if we didn't have any barriers. And I'm just like, I got to go back to my community and do something. So I worked at a nonprofit that was working primarily with low-income students getting into college. And so I was like, I don't know what else I want to do right now, but I do want to be working with students and being in my community. So for me, it was really key of being that, being in community and alongside my community. So yeah, and I knew I didn't want to go to school. So I think sometimes people emphasize and really value like a clear path, like, oh, you're really goal oriented. But sometimes I think there is something really valuable about the mystery and about how you can evolve. And I think create room for that. Like, and I hope, you know, although my parents were always kind of like, what is she doing? I actually, you know, really appreciate now as like a, you know, in my late 20s, like how much actually room they held for me and trusted me to kind of chart my own path. Of course, there's always that judgment. And of course, I always get the text of like, you need to go back to school and do, you know, be something. But, you know, just, I really appreciate that there was room for me to just trust that I was on my own path. And now, you know, I have a stable salary and they're like, oh, she's doing things. So it's, they're, you know, they did trust me. And so I think it's important, back to Yasmin's point of like duty to yourself, you know, duty to yourself, thinking about what you want to learn. So yeah, for me, it was never easy. It was never really clear. It still isn't. That's a lie that people tell you too, that, you know exactly where you end up, and that, you know, if you read Michelle Obama's Becoming book, she talks about like, you know, the myth that she was told, you know, what will you be when you grow up? You know, if you unpack that question, it's like, it's a singular thing that doesn't ever change. Like, that's a lie. So I think for me, there was like joy in knowing that like, there's mystery in that, and that's fine. And it's scary, but also, you know, if you don't want to be in a trade, like if you don't want to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, my brothers were all engineers, you know, I was just like, that's not me. You know, the social sector is very wide, and there's so much that you could do. That's not just, you know, admin or, you know, so there's actually, it's such a wide field. And, you know, growing up, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so being exposed to just different teachers in my life all throughout different points in my career, like, you know, connecting with Liz and Muna and learning from each mentor that I've had, even people who maybe not have considered mentors to me, but, you know, I learned something from them, whether it was a negative experience or a really positive experience. Like, I've always been able to learn something about, you know, that question I had about like, how do we make sure our communities and our people live healthy, joyful, whole lives, you know, what not to do, what to do, what else, you know, thinking about our imagination and what else can we do. I think we're at this moment right now in our world about, you know, where we're falling short on that. So I'm a huge advocate for, you know, being in this field, and there's just so many complicated problems that need really nuanced and experts to solve them. And I also think that those who are most impacted need to be centered in the solutions. And so I think that is one thing I wish that I knew of, like, you know, experts kind of come into communities and they're like, I have a PhD this, I have a master's in that. But what I've seen and what I've loved being able to experience with a lot of mentors in my life is like, there are other people who can acknowledge your expertise in something and, you know, in your lived experience, right? So kind of flipping it on the head of who's an expert, I think is super empowering as well. And, you know, sometimes going get a specialized degree is where it's at, if that is for you. But I also really hope to see, like, my dream is that other companies and organizations, you know, remove, this might be radical, but remove just like, you know, needed degrees to get a specific job. And right, so you can have an equivalent of, you know, lived experience or just work experience. I really do believe that we need to lift up other ways of knowledge and other knowing than just academic and learning from a book. So I really hope to see people who are most impacted and who most, you know, maybe couldn't afford to go to school, be part of those solutions and leaders. And I think we're seeing that right now with Black Lives Matter. And, you know, I think we're thinking about how to actually listen and act accordingly. So that was my little thing, scrub jobs of like degree requirements. But I'm not sure if I answered the question. Do we answer that adequately?
Yeah, no, above and beyond, all three of you, honestly, appreciating you sharing each of your stories, because I think for so many of our students and so many of us, there is that both internalized pressure and real pressure from, you know, families, others, to, you know, whether it's economically or just to reach that ideal of success, and the fact that it's not linear. And I love just the passion that's coming through from each of the three of you. I think it shows, like TA, you were saying, that like the learning does not end when the classroom ends. And I think when you, you know, have that like lifelong learning mindset, that's when we can, you know, scrub the requirements for degrees and and focus more on, what's the continual learning that's coming out of it. So with that said, what are the aspects of this work professional world that you find yourself in now that you feel college didn't prepare you for?
I could say right away the interpersonal skills on a professional level. I feel that as a person of color, I didn't feel prepared for the microaggressions or like how to properly navigate. By properly, I mean effectively, and in a way that's healthy for me to navigate some of the challenges that come with entering big systems where people work there. I've been working there for like upwards of 20 years, they're my seniors in a way that's very senior, and a lot of times it means that they're in their 60s, or whatever, or like even 70s, but that cultural divide and that that isn't just about race either. It's also about age, and being able to have effective conversations, effective dialogue across some of those hills, because they're not necessarily mountains unless things like devolve, but they can be hills. And I didn't have an understanding that I didn't have an understanding of how to effectively navigate that, or even understanding that I would have to navigate that. I mean, it sounds really strange because I'm a person of color. I'm an immigrant. I'm a citizen and all of that. But when you look at me, you see there's a Black person. Unless you're familiar with the community, then you can maybe like, maybe for East African descent, something like that. But generally, people see me, and what you see is, oh, that's a Black person. And you'd think that having gone through school here since 3rd grade, that I would be like, oh yeah, some of these challenges are coming up. So naive, right? And so it was something that I needed to learn to navigate. I enrolled in courses, like communication courses, like not like a full length course that you might go to school for, but like, several days kind of training kind of thing where you really talk about some issues that come up and how to navigate them, things like that. A lot of those similar courses are popping up right now for anti-racism and how to have that kind of dialogue, things like that. And for me, it was, how do I deal with people who are totally unaware of their racism and very well-meaning, good intentions. But there's a barb attached with almost everything that comes out of their mouth, and they're totally unaware of it, And how do I navigate that situation and still engage with that person in a way that allows me to, do my best and, collaborate in a way that allows us together to be effective in whatever it is that we're doing. That's something that nobody prepared me for, and that I had to kind of stumble through and then find resources to help me to like understand. Because sometimes it's, what is going on? Is this what I think it is or not? What? Things like that.
Yeah, I would say the 2 things that pop into my brain are work-life balance and learning to say no. I think when you get launched into the nonprofit sphere and all of a sudden you have certain skills that are, it's not a degree, but it's like maybe you're bilingual, and you're doing free interpretation and translation, or you're like being asked to be this spokesperson for this like monolith community. I would say no. I would go back and teach myself and tell myself and arm myself and have someone train me on being able to recognize when that's being asked of me and saying, actually, no, like I can do that, but you're gonna have to pay me for that, right? Because that is, right, who is seen as an expert, right? That's unpaid labor. And that often happens to like women and femmes, right? And a lot of that is women of color. So, and like work-life balance, I would think the work, when you want to better community, it's, you know, it's personal. So for me, I definitely dove a lot of hours outside of the 40-hour work week. And yeah, I think sometimes you lose sight of what's important, and like the work is 100% important, but also like so is family, so is finding time for joy, so is your mental health. And so I think for me, I had definitely a lot of good people in my life that I worked with, colleagues and friends that, you know, checked in on this, and, you know, we would talk about it. It's like, man, you know, like we all just worked so hard and we're not finding actually time to take care of ourselves, right? So not sacrificing that, because it actually doesn't do the community good service if you are burning out. So burnout is a huge thing. And so I have, you know, self-care practices that are, you know, I have at my disposal now. And so, you know, things that I didn't have that care strategy when I was younger, but now, you know, it's still, you know, a work in progress, but I think that's really important. And yeah, saying no. I think as a young yet queer woman of color in a nonprofit, I felt uncomfortable sometimes being asked to do certain things. And I think you want to be seen as someone who goes above and beyond, someone who is, you know, who will do anything to get like to serve the mission and to like do the job at hand, because you want to be seen as helpful. You want to be seen as someone who cares, right? But I think it's okay to question people's tactics and strategies. And I think sometimes when I felt uncomfortable, I just said yes, even though it went against my values or it just made me uncomfortable. So, you know, I won't get into it, but, you know, students, you can text me later. But like, you know, saying no, I think is really, really important. And just having boundaries on your time, on your space, I think is super important. So plug for boundaries.
I don't have, I guess, a lot to add. I think what each of you said are things that I've also learned. Like you kind of, especially when I first joined the workforce in my first role, I had sort of this sense of like, I worked hard to get this internship and here I am and everyone should respect me and my journey. And I was very young and it was my first job and there was a lot that I didn't know about the workplace, and I had to adapt to the workplace expectations and to the norms of that environment. And there were parts of that were uncomfortable and didn't match my values. So I had to think really hard about what I was willing to kind of put up with and what I was going to say no to and how I was going to work through all of those things. So I think part of that is learning humility and learning like where I come from and what all I still can learn from the people around me, but then also how I can use my experience and my knowledge to advocate for others and for myself. I think another thing that I don't feel like college really prepared me for was financial independence and the skills needed to be an adult. I was very like sheltered and very supported throughout my college. Like I always knew I could go home and stay with my parents if I needed to, or I had a lot of like backup supports, but figuring out like renting for the first time was very confusing. My parents never had a savings or had much advice for how to pay off student loans and things like that. So I had to learn how to do that through my own research or asking other people or making mistakes and overspending before my next paycheck and just like dealing with that. And I think part of that is just part of like gaining that experience. But I do think that I wish that my undergrad institution had more self-awareness of that being something that students would benefit from learning about and having some more of those practical experiences as we were getting ready to graduate and things like that.
Yeah, thank you. And if we have any questions, from students on the line, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Otherwise, I can keep going as well. But want to make sure that we're using this as a forum for students to be able to, connect directly. And so with that, we've talked a little bit about the roles you're each in today. Could we dig a little bit deeper into that? Would you mind sharing what does a typical day look like at work?
I can start. I'm a program manager at my nonprofit, so each day is kind of different. I supervise a few staff who do direct service in the community, so a lot of my day is focused around connecting with them and supporting them and giving them a sounding board if they're experiencing challenges, or if they are having a really good day and want to talk about how that's going, or some of the more logistical things towards achieving our work plan and setting goals with each of the people that I work with and talking together about just the various aspects of our projects. And then I have, so every day is it's focused on meetings and talking with people. And I guess an aspect that's most challenging and rewarding, I think in my role as a manager, everything is always in conversation, and nothing's ever concluded. It's always like every day we're building on the relationships that we have already established and growing and challenging ourselves. And I've done a lot of learning through that. I'm a new manager, so I know that I'm not doing a perfect job, but I think that sometimes it's a challenge, and it's also the most rewarding part is taking each day and trying my best to connect with my staff. I think especially during the pandemic and everything that's happened in the last few months, there's a lot going on in my colleagues' personal lives and professionally, and I try my best to support them directly through listening and being a sounding board for them, but then also advocating for them to our like broader management, as well as the donors who support our work. And that's broad, but so is my work. So I'll let others share.
We can go backwards, I guess. We keep doing it, boom, boom, boom. So in my role, I support 3 different funds. And so in philanthropy, there are donors that kind of come to a table and say, okay, we want to fund this issue. And then grant makers, which is what Borealis is, we decide where the money goes. And so for my 3 funds, we are making grants, which is giving the money to systems change workers and nonprofits, to journalists that are led by Black, Indigenous people of color. And we're also giving to what we call philanthropy serving orgs, which are basically like professional membership organizations for folks in philanthropy. It's very meta. But so we're funding those folks who are trying to advance racial equity work throughout the sector. So as you can see, it's kind of all over the place. So I help support our director in making those decisions on who to give money to, getting the applications out, which are called RFPs, and then evaluating them after we give the grant out. And it's admin, it's program decisions and strategy, it's communication, it's a lot of writing. I spend my days in spreadsheets and email, but it's interesting. So I'm learning a lot from all 3. And I would say more broadly, if it's helpful, philanthropy is all about the charitable giving. And I really think the history is predicated on charity. But, I have a colleague who is a trans Latina woman who calls it resource mobilizing. Instead, she doesn't call herself as a philanthropy professional, which I love, because I think philanthropy is founded on, wealth that was built on the exploitation of Black and Brown people. So, thinking about philanthropy is actually moving resources back into communities that should have been invested in the beginning, So I think for me, I view it as getting the money back where it belongs. So philanthropy is part of the ecosystem in which nonprofits, operate. And so it's very interconnected, I would say. And so if you're interested in looking at kind of the interconnections and, asking that question, like how do you make that decision of where the money goes? Maybe, philanthropy might be an interesting field for you.
A day as a speech therapist in St. Paul Public Schools. It is kind of hectic some days. Depends on what my caseload is, like how many students I'm working with at any given time. It also depends on like how little or how much they need my services. I work on a team with a social worker, an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, and 2 special education teachers. So we kind of have our little powwow, we sit together and we have a conversation about what's going on with us, because that's important, right? To just continue to build relationship and best understand what our capacity is, whatever day. So we touch base with one another, and we talk about what's on our agenda for this week. But by what's on our agenda, I mean which organizations or other providers are we also working with? Because sometimes our children that we're serving, or 3 to 5 year olds, are at Head Starts, or they're in a daycare setting, or they're in a Montessori preschool kind of setting, or they're at home, or home is just too hard and too hectic, and so we're going to be at the library or in the park, or something that works for that child and the caregiver, who may be their parent, their grandmother, maybe it's like an adult, other family relative, or it's a guardian, maybe they were a foster child, right? So we have our agenda. We're talking about all the different places, and we're talking about all the different students, and it's a weekly agenda, thank goodness, because there's just way too much to track. Sometimes we have to, even though it's not on the calendar to have our team meeting, we just squeeze one in because there's just too much going on and we need that time. So over the course of a day, I will generally get up around 5:30, 6 a.m. just to make sure that I have time to myself. I can eat breakfast and it's not rushed. I can breathe, let my peeps know I'm alive, responding to emails that are personal, etc. And then I take a little bit of time around 7 or 7:30 or whatever, just go down my to-do list, what is it that I need to make sure that I crank out today? Could be that I'm writing a report, as well as doing maybe 5 to sometimes 7 visits, each going anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour long. You've got to cook for yourself if you're me. So you got to make sure you've got your meal set too, so and your snacks. And am I going to have some kind of movement in throughout my day, because I'm working with children? And I feel you. Yes, absolutely. Self-care. So, I got to make sure that I'm also moving for what my body needs, not just the little movements that I'm doing with children. So I spend time commuting from site to site. Again, that Head Start to a home, to a park, to a daycare, wherever it is. So I'm driving a lot, which is not the best, but I don't quite know yet how to do this job without us driving as much as we do. So yeah, I'm working with children who maybe just have our tick. So for example, the most obvious might be We've got the child who doesn't have a specific sound. So, you know, they're missing their G's. So all their G's sound like D's. So it's a daddy, it's not a doggy. Things like that, you know, and that's really basic. A lot of funny things happen when kids switch out sounds. I've got some great stories which are inappropriate that I can't share with you, but it's just the best. Picture somebody who's trying to say truck, but instead of the TR says a different word. So, and they don't know, and all the adults are just, you know, keep it together. But anyway, my days are just really entertaining. So we got the artic kiddo, we've got the child who doesn't have any language skills, and so that's a little more challenging because they can't tell people that they need something. They can't tell people that they're feeling pain, things like that. We've got the children who are selectively mute. We've got the children who have some organic issues, maybe cleft palate repair just recently happened, things like that. And then, you know, we have children who have multiple things going on at the same time, as well as possible, you know, trauma at home. You know, usually it's not a current thing. We're addressing it if we find out about it right away. We're all mandated reporters, so that's just, you know, some things are just not okay, and we need to help people to be safer and to be able to, you know, allow and help families to stay together in a way that's healthy. So we're doing that kind of work too, as well as, and thank goodness I'm on a team, because that's a lot for one person to be doing. You can imagine that's why we need these team meetings. But if it's a good day, there are, you know, everybody knows what's supposed to be happening. So when I come for a visit, it's like, yep, we've done it before, let's go. That happens sometimes. Generally, life, children, if you all have any experience with children, you know that that's a thing where it's like, have a plan, it's great, you know it's not going to happen. So just be ready to just go with the flow. And that's the most challenging thing about my job and also the most rewarding. Working with families and systems that are supporting a child is not simple. The idea is simple, but the execution can be really complicated. And it's always an open conversation. Like Phoebe, you were talking about relationship. It's always about an ongoing open conversation, really coming back to yourself and being aware of who you are, where you are, and how you're showing up, as well as taking into account where other people are. And just, you know, is the cup half full today, or is it kind of running on empty? You know, it's like, where is everybody? That's the most challenging part of work that I do, and also the most rewarding. It's allowing me to grow as a human being, as a professional, and just, you know, continue to develop. It's really fantastic.
I love it. Thank you. I think the through line in all of this is just the fact that all of you are serving others. And it's so clear when each of you share, and really the importance of taking time for self-care. That's something, as you're so passionate in the work you're doing, you can't, as we talked about, you know, let that faucet run empty. That and no one else is going to tell you to stop. So it's just really important. I think you each have done a great job being intentional about that. Well, we have just a few minutes left. Would love if you would share final advice for our students that are interested in jobs in these type of fields. You know, what can they be doing? Should they be doing while they're in school? I think a great thing is just having conversations like this, connecting with professionals. So I always encourage, if it's possible for students to connect with you after the fact, if that's available, if you'd also share how best to do that, whether it's email, LinkedIn, etc.
Okay. Find your joy, whatever that is. And if you don't know, let that be where you start. Like, what is my joy? And I don't mean flash in the pan, you know, flash fire, like cheap thrill kind of thing, but like a deep, sustaining, this is the thing that moves me and just gets me in that groove, whatever it is, you know, find that and let that be the thing that's constantly like your reminder, like, oh, stay away from that. Oh, go towards that. and let it be, you know, your joy is what you're always moving towards. I didn't come to this myself. You know, I've had mentors, I've had coaches. So find your joy and find those people who are in support of whatever it is that you're joyful about. Contact, I'm on LinkedIn. It's fresh, it's super fresh. Your LinkedIn profiles might look so much better than mine because I've just not been doing this. I was telling Matt that it's 3 days old, you know, so be kind, please. But find me on LinkedIn. And also email is also a really good way. And I'll put that in the chat right now.
Yeah, I agree with Yasmin. Like, just find the people that help you feel recharged, that are willing to listen to you when you're feeling lost, or support you when you are having a hard day, and celebrating with you when you've had a good day. And those people will evolve over time, and your relationships with them too. But it's important to like have a broad network of people that you can surround yourself with and go to for support. Maybe some of them are professors, maybe some of them are aunts and uncles, maybe some of them are younger siblings. Having a wide variety of people to talk to has always been something that I've relied on to remember who I am and remind myself of the things that matter to me.
I put in the chat, but learn to negotiate your salary, learn how to ask for a raise, know your worth, period. Network and try to make relationships that aren't transactional, like actually meaningful. You know, people say network, but you know, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. So make sure that you are investing in those and keeping up people that matter to you. And also, your job is not your identity. That's it.
I love it. Just so concise, each of you giving us the nuggets. On a Friday afternoon, I feel like I'm always inspired to end my week like this. Thank you to the three of you so much for sharing for our students. And for those interested in continuing to have more conversations like this with our stellar Wallin alumni and other professionals, we'll meet again on August 7th, talking about health and wellness careers. We've shared in the chat bar, but contact information, if you're interested in contacting these professionals as well, let us know. We'll certainly make those connections. Thank you all so much again. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
See you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.